Many technologies have a shelf life, much like services on the internet. They have a shelf life. And what I mean by that is they achieve a certain point at which they are relevant and popular. People get to do the things they want to do with them, and then the things that they want to do don't really change, or they do change, and as a result, the tools that we used to do these things with are no longer as useful as they once were. So one of the things is maybe the portable record player. Remember Sony's Walkman? I suppose the thing we do with them hasn't really changed. We still listen to music on the go, but most of us don't do that on cassette tapes anymore. So they've been replaced with the CD Walkman, maybe the DAT Walkman, several other formats, the MP3 player, and eventually, I guess, our mobile devices, our mobile phones have taken on that responsibility. And that's just because they are so much better at doing it than the portable Sony Walkman cassette player ever was. And it's just a sign of our times that happens. And I suppose it happens with literally every technology. Look at Flickr. Very recently they've amended their term, so it's kind of not really as useful as it once was. Also doesn't really fit into the landscape anymore. Many of those features that Flickr once offered are now being offered kind of casually by other services like Facebook, for example. But then Facebook itself, is it still relevant? Its popularity is certainly waning, that is true, but it's also because other services have come along that kind of replaced what people want to do these days. So think of Snapchat and Instagram and all these things that then, you know, have partially been bought by Facebook, and services or tools that have been integrated into existing tools so that these tools remain relevant, like stories, for example. Even YouTube have implemented stories, and they've implemented something along the lines of Twitter and Facebook features to stay relevant. So I suppose one of those things when I sign up for a service is I hardly ever think of the end date, you know, the end of life, or at which point will I move on to something else if I have to. And I kind of feel like that point has just happened really with the release of WordPress 5.0 and the mainstream Gutenberg text editor. It's one of those things, I've looked at it, I'm trying to use it, I'm trying to become friends with it. I like Mr. Gutenberg, of course, but I think the implementation in WordPress has made WordPress as a tool for me, the way I use WordPress, and I have used WordPress since 2006. Gutenberg has made WordPress less useful to me than it once was. So I've been relying on WordPress since 2006 because I was working at many different companies in London at that time, and I had a couple of websites at that time, and I wanted to make changes on the go no matter which computer I was at. So I didn't always have my own computer with me, and if I wanted to make a change to a website, it meant hard recoding things, testing things out on various browsers, because if something works in browser 1 doesn't mean it works on browser 2. Test it on several resolutions and then upload the files. Also make a backup of the previous files just so that you can go back. And those tools were cumbersome, version control wasn't really there, and it was just, you couldn't just type something on a mobile device and click a button and you update the front page of a website. It just wasn't like that. So all that changed when I discovered WordPress in 2006 with WordPress version 2.6.5. Tyner, I remember it was called. It was just before they changed the interface to something that we still have today. Before that, it's very, very clunky, very confusing. WordPress has never been 100% fantastic. It was always a great blogging tool, and once you built the website, that was the hard part. I always still find that is the hard part. Once you did that, all you needed to do was occasionally reformat things and just add blog posts if and when you see fit. And once you got the concept, it was really easy. Create a post, add your title, put some text, throw in some images, maybe a YouTube video. Bob's your uncle. Click publish. As time evolved, I started using WordPress in a different way as well. I used it as a notebook, a scratch pad of all things. I even had different websites for different projects so that I could find information that I was writing down for myself and have it openly accessible from any kind of mobile device, any desktop, laptop, computer that was around. And to my own surprise, a lot of readers found that fascinating as well and found that very useful. And thanks to Google, my websites rank fairly highly. So very geek type information on problems that I just discovered the solution to. I could just write down and find it easy again. And part of what attracted me to WordPress is the fact that once the initial setup is done, I'm in full control of that data. I can add it, I can remove it, I can make things private, I can make things public. It's fantastic. It's exactly what I wanted. So it had never really occurred to me that that type of system would eventually turn into something that would kind of borderline, what's the word I'm looking for, piss me off, so that I may be in need of finding a new solution for that. But then of course the thing is, WordPress has been around for about 15 years now. I've discovered it for probably more than that. I've discovered it when it was already getting mainstream. Now, according to the latest trends, 20-25% of all websites, of all new domains registered with all domain registrars apparently have WordPress on it or will get an installation of WordPress. So that shows you how popular this tool is. And I suppose professional web designers always liked it because it featured the versatility of something that they could build and then let the user, who was not a web designer, handle the day-to-day running of it. And now with Gutenberg, I find that advantage is kind of going away a little bit. So Gutenberg now wants you to place a different block for every single paragraph you'll ever put on there. I'll tell you why Gutenberg is not so useful for me anymore as it once was. Back in the day, I could just paste something in from a text document, for example, and that's part of my classic editor layout there. WordPress does turn it into somewhat of an annoying HTML code, so certain characters are switched over. That's just one of those things you learn to live with at one point. But if I ever wanted to copy that back, I could either do that from the front page of my website or even from the back end and paste that somewhere else. So I thought that was very useful. Well, now with blocks, I can't really do that anymore unless I'm on the front page. And I'm not always on the front page. So oftentimes I literally use WordPress as something like, the iOS Notes application. And it's convenient for me that way. So that's a functionality I don't really like anymore. Also, I can't just go and write stuff anymore in WordPress. I have to really think of what I have to click, and it's just too much for me. I really like Gutenberg as a kind of custom post and page editing tool. And many frameworks exist that have had such functionality way before WordPress had it built into its core. I think Gutenberg could have been a nice framework that for users who would want to be adventurous, they could have maybe used it, installed it as a plugin, like it was the case until WordPress 4.9, and just use this occasionally if and when you think this is a great way for you to edit it. And now they've gone one step further and made it mandatory that we use Gutenberg. Well, not mandatory, they're still having a plugin there that is called the Classic Editor plugin, and I've made a video over on my other channel how to install it. So we can bring that functionality of the Classic Editor back, but sadly, this is not a long-term solution for WordPress, because it means the WordPress team are supporting the Classic Editor for the next 2 years. I believe 2021 was the date I read there on the welcome screen. And that's a limited time, but it's also a good enough time for me to look at what I could replace WordPress with. And it makes it really difficult because I have a big investment in WordPress as a platform. I run all my websites on WordPress, and replacing that archive of content with something else, it's going to be tricky. So I may just leave that in place and potentially start something else, use other services, literally think broader, think wider. I think having a website is still very relevant today, but I think WordPress as a content management tool may not be as relevant to what I'm doing as it was 12 years ago. And it has been for all those 12 years. And it is literally just because of this attitude of the team to say, Gutenberg is the future, you will use it at one point. I don't think I like that. I never imagined that could happen. And I'm extremely disappointed that I'm going to have to deal with this. I mean, another option would be to stay on WordPress 4.9 indefinitely, but it's not really a solution either, because there'll be the point at which security updates for that version will stop, plugin compatibility will break, and we've been there before. You know, have you ever run a 2-year-old iOS version? And look at what happens to the apps. It's just not something that's feasible. You're either going to be current or you're custom forever, and then you're really risking security breaches, and I don't really want that to happen. So I don't know, it's an interesting thing that I feel reminded of what happened to many of these companies that didn't see their own demise coming. They thought they were so big and they never saw this as a possibility that somebody could literally go and leave them and switch for something else. Look at Kodak, look at Polaroid, and look at all these large services who thought we're king of the world. If you ever looked at MySpace recently, I know it used to be relevant at one point, but it isn't anymore. And I kind of feel with a heavy heart that this is somewhat happening to WordPress, as the people who develop it, they've got massive egos, and they think really it's just the best thing in the world to have it. But one of the things that made WordPress so valuable was that it was so beneficial for many other people as well as yourself. So if that tide's kind of turning, perhaps it is time to look at another content management system.